Hi everyone, my name is Terri and welcome to my channel, The Pink Dumbbell Problem, where usually I talk about fitness, feminism, and philosophy. But today it's going to be a little bit different. I'm going to swap out the fitness for some talk about sport, and particularly Olympic sports, and more particularly gender and Olympic sports. So let's get right into that now. In my line of work, an Olympic season is always an opportunity for some really juicy discussions about gender and sport and how those things are presented. And this one was no exception. There was all the usual wacky takes on what women can or can't do. And we're definitely going to get to some of those. We will also get to some of the happier stories. There was a lot of wins in this one. And I'm going to really dive into a few of those, including my absolute favorite one at the end. So the first one is, well, it's actually the first two. And this is where sport and gender get into a hairy situation. Literally in this case, because these two first stories are about hair issues. First story is about South Korean archer An San, 3-time gold medalist, amazing. And that wasn't the big story, unfortunately. The really big story that broke out was that people were calling her a feminist, and that's a bad thing in South Korea, and saying that because she had short hair, she was a feminist and a man-hater. Women just can't win sometimes. And this is not me slagging off South Korea or anything. This happens in pretty much every culture in the world, in any language. A woman wins something, especially something that has been for centuries been very masculine, very manly activity like archery. They have to take her down in some way. So they call her, some kind of a gender traitor, or they question her orientation, or they do something nasty. And of course, hair is a huge, huge topic when it comes to women, and particularly at different points throughout history and in different countries around the world. There's oodles of examples of how hair, and particularly having short hair on a woman, has been used to shame somebody for their gender identity or accuse them of being nonconformist, or you name it. And actually, I'm going to stop there because that's probably a topic for another video. So moving on. A lot of women in South Korea are not having it. They are not having it. And they are reclaiming short hair and the right to have short hair and identify however you want to within having short hair as a right of their own. So there's some nice solidarity coming up around this. The other little silver lining piece around this, around solidarity, is that Han Ji-young is another activist who started a hashtag on Twitter and other social media, which is #women_shortcut_campaign. So if you're interested in showing your support, you pop onto Twitter and find that hashtag and spread the word. Now, the other hair-related story, the other hairy story, has to do with the swimming competition. And this one actually happened before the Olympics started. The swimming authority for these games, which is the International Swimming Federation, made a decision that a certain type of swim cap that covers all the hair was not appropriate. And the cap they decided was not appropriate, and swimmers could, risk being sanctioned or disqualified if they wore it in the pool, is one that is specifically designed for the hair type and the hairstyles usually worn by Black women. Oh boy. Who was the PR person on this? Honestly, I hope they've been canned. The problem that the Swimming Federation has with the cap is that it is, a little different shape than the usual, and therefore doesn't, quote unquote, follow the natural lines of the swimmer's head. This is ridiculously silly. I mean, just childish of a thing. Like, you don't like the shape of somebody's head so they can't swim? Like, again, this could probably be a topic for a whole separate video, but I'm going to do it quickly. Whose head is natural? I mean, if it's a human head, it's natural? Like, did somebody get a fake head attached? Like, what does it take for a head in the shape of a given head to be natural? That's what I want to know. That's what I want answers. I want names. I want to know who made that decision. I want names, because I want to see who the person is responsible for that. I need to know. Inquiring minds want to know. So let's go from hair on to clothing, another big topic in women's history throughout time and throughout the world. And of course, this Olympiad was no different. So there was a couple of big stories, but a few that really took the internet by storm and really got a lot of people's attention. The first, of course, I had to bring this one up. It was one of the most famous stories of the whole games, was the Norwegian women's handball team. I've already done a video about dress codes and how they're sexist, but this is This is a whole new level. This really takes the cake and the pie and the ice cream. And I don't know where it takes it to, but it's not a good place. Now, the problem was that the athletes on the handball team decided to wear bicycle shorts, which have about, maybe an inch, maybe 2 inches of fabric below the crease of the thigh where it attaches to the hip, instead of the traditional bikini bottoms. And they were actually fined for not wearing the correct uniform. Part of the reason this story went so big and so many people around the world saw it was because a celebrity, not a sports celebrity, but actually a music one, put her weight behind the story. And that was, of course, the singer Pink. And she tweeted about this and said, "Good on them. I will pay the fine." That wasn't a tiny fine, by the way. It was €1,500, which, depending on the exchange rate on a given day, is about $2,200 Canadian. And just to give you a little context, at least for those in Canada, that would be what it would roughly cost for airfare for me to fly from here in Halifax all the way to Vancouver and back twice and get a snack on the plane. Pink stood up and did that. She kind of became the whole fairy godmother of this Olympic team for that offer. And good on her for doing that. That was lovely to see. Again, another great story of solidarity, woman to woman happening here. Wonderful. This is also an important story too, though, because the uniforms in a given sport can often be what turns a lot of women off of a sport. You might have all kinds of talent, but if for whatever reason you're not comfortable being seen in public wearing skimpy bikini bottoms and you have no choice but to wear them or your team gets in trouble, and I mean, they were fortunate they only had a fine. They could have been thrown out of the games for this. That's what we call a chilling effect or a cooling effect on women's participation in a particular activity, in this case handball. And of course, the other story, and I think one of the biggest wins of this whole Olympic Games, was the German women's gymnastics team. Love this. They did exactly what I was just talking about and said, you know what, no more of this over-sexualization of the costumes. Men have been wearing long pants in Olympic competition for I don't know how many decades now, ages, probably since well before any of the competitors were born. And it makes no sense that the women can't do the same. It has no effect, negative or positive in any way, on their ability to perform the routines and show their skills. You can see the lines of their bodies. There's no impediment for the judges. It's a no-brainer. By the way, I really love the look of the uniforms. I think they nailed it. I think a lot more people would be a lot more comfortable in a unitard than a leotard. And the risk of costume malfunctions is much, much, much lower in a unitard. The other thing, too, is gymnastics is something that, I hate to say it, but it gets pornified a lot. There's people who watch the women's gymnastics, and let's be honest, it's girls, right? It's very young. The upper age is the early to mid 20s at the most in gymnastics competitions. So you're talking about very, very young girls and people only tuning in to ogle them in these very skimpy outfits. So the less skimpy, ultimately, the safer some of these young participants will be. It shouldn't have to be that way, but that's the world we live in. Okay, next topic is running. Why is it always the running competitions? Here we go. No surprise to me, certainly, and certainly not to a lot of other people, that as soon as we get into the track and field arena and we're looking at the running competitions, some women are going to get pulled off and tested for hormone levels. Two in particular that I want to talk about, two that made news headlines, are Christine Mboma and Beatrice Masilingi. They are both 18-year-olds, still high schoolers, still teenagers, from Namibia. And they were pulled off of the track after their runs and were tested for testosterone. And you know what? I don't even really have to go into details on this because you already know the story, because this is basically the same story as what they did to Caster Semenya several years ago when she was competing. And, same thing, same testing, same reasoning. Second verse, same as the first, right? There is a variation in testosterone levels in all people of all sexes and all genders, and that includes me. I have a condition called polycystic ovarian syndrome, or PCOS. That may be what these young women have. We don't know, and frankly, it's none of our business. So if you're out there asking, stop. If they want to tell us, they will tell us, and that's their decision to make. It's just one of many examples of why somebody's testosterone levels can be a little bit different than somebody else's, and it's perfectly normal and natural. And of course, I think you know where I'm going with this, it tends to be women of color who are tested for higher testosterone levels after running events. And generally speaking, amongst women of color, it's usually Black women. There have been Asian women tested over the last several years in different events, and white women as well, but not nearly as much. And of course, again, Caster Semenya being the most famous case, there is really definitely a bias there of a Black woman looking a little too fit, a little too athletic, and being a little too good at what she's doing. So again, just like the issue with the swimming caps, who's doing this? Who's making this decision? I want names once again, but also who's testing the testers? Like who hires these people who do the testing and the decision making that this woman gets to be tested, but this woman over here doesn't? That all has to be brought out into the open. I think there's some serious dirt under that rug, and we need to lift that up and vacuum that out. Of course, there is, as so many of these stories have this year, there's a lovely little silver lining, a little happiness tidbit in there, and that is that Christine Mboma has won a silver medal in one of her events, and that makes her the first ever woman from Namibia to win an Olympic medal. So good on her, and good for her for setting a historic record for her country and for the world. Now, I want to dig into some of the really great stories about progress that was made, the happier stories, but no less controversial in many cases. I think you know who I'm going to talk about next, and that, of course, is Laurel Hubbard, the trans woman who is a weightlifter from New Zealand. I need to preface this and say that this is not technically the first time there's been trans women in the Olympics. These athletes this year, here in 2021 at the Tokyo Games, they're the first ones to compete openly trans. There have always been trans athletes, but they didn't compete or win their medals while they were publicly out as trans. And so that's where the big change is coming here. These athletes are the first to do that. Laurel Hubbard was the big news right out of the gate, particularly because not only is she the first trans woman to compete in an event, but she is also in weightlifting, which is, again, similar to archery that I talked about earlier, is a sport that women have been banned from for many, many years. This was, kind of symbolic. I think it was really lovely that this was the first competition that a trans woman was in. And this might sound harsh, but I'm kind of glad she didn't win, because there was a lot of people out there saying that she was going to have an unfair advantage having been assigned male at birth and having a certain amount of male privilege when it comes to muscle and bone density and all of that kind of thing. And this proved that no, that's not the case. I've talked in other videos, particularly the one from last week about physical literacy, that so much of what goes into success of an athlete has to do with training. So maybe she had more access to training before she transitioned, but obviously not enough for her to win a medal. And I hope that puts to rest some of that argument that because she was assigned male at birth, she's automatically going to be stronger. Two other stories, and they're both Canadian, so I'm just going to do a little brag here. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No, I shouldn't brag. I'm sorry. That's un-Canadian of me. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. Sorry. The first story, a little lesser known than the next one. But the first one is about Kim Daniels. Now, Kim Daniels is not participating as an athlete. She's the first trans woman to participate as an official in a sport or a judge in a sport. And there wasn't a whole lot of news. I don't know if news sources outside of Canada picked this up or if we just got the news because she's one of our own. But she was in the canoe slalom competition and has been an Olympic judge in the past pre-transition and now has returned to judge again post-transition and is therefore the first official in any of the competitions at the Olympic level to do that. I will put the link down below for the CBC News article about this, about Kim's involvement in her transition during her career, but also the rules on this. There are no Olympic rules. The IOC does not have rules against trans persons participating as officials or judges in any of the sports. And there's also no rules against trans men participating in any of the sports. Interesting. So 100% trans misogyny all the way down. The Canadian women's soccer team, the national team, first of all, won the gold medal. And second of all, there is a player on that team named Quinn. They go by one name and they use they, them pronouns. And they have been playing soccer and playing women's soccer since, being a little one, but have recently transitioned and were allowed to keep their position on the women's team to go to these Olympics. And that makes Quinn the first openly trans and openly non-binary athlete to win a gold Olympic medal. This is massively important. I mean, literally setting some history for the world here. And really important that they did this and that the Canadian team allowed them to do this because, of course, there's so many young people watching this who are now going to have a role model, and not just a role model in Quinn themselves, although wonderful role model they are, but also in Quinn's teammates, because they've been standing up for them the whole time. They've been very supportive. That's how you do it, folks. That's how you do allyship. You stand up and you go, no, this one's with us and is on our team. So let's make sure everybody's included. It was beautiful. I promised you my absolute favorite stories at the end. I actually have two. I was going to do one, but I can't choose. One of the most important things that happened in this Olympic Games, and that was Simone Biles, the world's greatest gymnast right now, and maybe will be for some decades to come, stepped back from some of her competitions. People talk about Olympic wins, they usually mean medals. They don't mean somebody taking themselves out of a competition and therefore out of medal contention. But this stepping away and saying, no, I don't need the medal, I need to do other things, is the ultimate win. This is the real big win of this entire Olympiad. There's a lot of people got really, really, really bitter about this in the media and particularly on social media. She was a loser. She was giving up, and she, all this. Oh my God! Like, I can't even say it with a straight face. It's that ridiculous. I mean, Simone Biles, the most decorated gymnast of all time, and you're gonna call her a loser because she stepped back to preserve her own health and well-being. Like, seriously, if ever there was a time for the phrase "bitch, please," this is it. Simone Biles is a loser, and I'm the Queen of England. Come on. This is her big damn hero moment. And yes, that's a Firefly reference. There has been so much toxicity. There's been so much bad behavior. There's been so much unhealthy tradition around sport in general and gymnastics in particular. It is a nasty, nasty sport. And she just used her clout and used her years of experience to say, no more. I'm stepping back. She hopefully has drawn a line in the sand with this. And it may not seem like a big deal to people now, but I really think that in the decades to come, the next, 10, 20, maybe 30 years, whatever, that people are going to look back at this and go, yeah, she was the one who fixed this. She's the one who made this safer for everybody. And if that's not a huge win, I don't know what is. And then finally, saving my favorite for last. Now, those of you who only watch this channel are going to be surprised. I didn't pick a story about a woman. But those of you who follow me on Twitter or know me in real life, this won't be a surprise at all. So my absolute favorite story is the knitting. In real life, I am an avid knitter. I have been for well over 20 years. So my favorite thing that I've been following through this last few weeks is all of the coverage of Tom Daley, the knitter from the British team, who also happens to be a diver. See, that's how much of a knitter I am. He's a knitter first, diver second. Oh, and he won some medals or something, like whatever. Couple of things. One is that I have experienced throughout my hobby career and my day-to-day career working in fitness, that when fitness people find out I knit, they think that's strange. And when knitting people find out I do fitness, they think that's strange. And there's some sort of divide we have. I don't know, again, if that's just a Canadian thing or other societies have that too. But there's a whole thing we've got where, people are crafty and artsy versus being athletic. And you can be both. And I love, love, love that he really made a display of being both. I love this story for several reasons. Obviously, I'm paying close attention to the Instagram and the pictures and everything else, but there's also, of course, like everything on my channel, there's a gender component to this. You know what really impressed me the most is not just the knitting and all of that and exposing people to this wonderful hobby that I love so much, but it was actually the media. Interestingly, because they're usually the bad guys in my videos. Knitting in recent generations and centuries has been really feminine coded. Really, this is a woman's thing. It's small, it's quiet, it's contained, it's homemakery. And maybe it's because he's got quite a degree of privilege. He was a medal winner, he's white, he's English speaking, he's very good looking and very talented. Maybe it's all of that. But, he's also a queer person. So he is married to a man. And there's been some backlash about that in past years in the media. So the fact that they didn't go for him on gender and sexual orientation grounds was really interesting. I don't know if that's a sign of change. I don't know if that's just because they were awestruck at his talent and didn't want to disrespect a winner. I don't know if that's because, knitting has this sort of special magical thing that when you start doing it in public, people just have to stare at what you're doing. I haven't obviously done it in recent years because of COVID, but anytime I've knit in public before, people will stop and just be like, can I watch? That's so fascinating. So maybe there was a bit of that. I don't know. Regardless of why he wasn't bullied by the media, I'm thrilled. It was a great moment for, again, role modeling, and role modeling that a man can have a hobby that is considered feminine and still be a great athlete and still be masculine in his appearance and his presentation. There's a lot of great stuff happening there. Also nice too, of course, to see a young man do it, because there's sort of this association that knitting is just for old grannies, that, those of us of different age groups don't do it. Well, look, everyone from little kids up to the very, very elderly are involved in knitting, and it's not an age thing at all. The really lovely thing here is using his privilege as a medalist, as somebody who's white, who is cisgendered, to showcase that, there is a less toxic version of masculinity, even for a world-class athlete, that you don't have to be a dude bro in order to be an Olympic winner. And that's a lovely message to send out. So there you have it, folks. Thank you so much for watching. I know this was a long one. And of course, I couldn't possibly cover every single story from the entire Olympic Games. There's just way too much content to cover. So if I missed out your favorite win, your favorite bad thing that happened, whatever, about gender, let me know in the comments down below. Let's get a little bit of discussion going down there. And I got to get back to my knitting, so I will see you next week. And in the meantime, lift heavy and fight the patriarchy. Bye-bye.